I'm becoming more and more convinced that the Jougan and the Kokugan aren't actually two separate dojutsu at all. They're the same power, just split perfectly down the middle. I know that sounds like a shaky theory on paper, but the longer I kept rewatching the scenes with these eyes, the more it clicked for me. Kishimoto rarely draws or designs details just for the sake of it. Let's start with what's right there on the surface. Boruto's Jougan shows up in his right eye. Kawaki's Kokugan shows up in his left. You might think that's a small detail, but now think about their horns. Boruto's horn grows on the right side of his forehead, exactly where the Jougan lives. Kawaki's horn grows on the left, right where the Kokugan pattern awakens. Honestly, I didn't think much of it at first either, until I remembered that Dojutsu in the Otsutsuki world almost always show up symmetrically, activating in both eyes at once. But here, suddenly we get strictly one eye each, and they're mirror images of each other. That's not a plot hole, that's a design choice. And that's really just the beginning, because it gets even more interesting from here. If you stop looking at how these powers appear and start looking at what they actually do, the picture gets even clearer. The Jougan is the eye of time and spirit. It senses the boundaries between dimensions and even gives Boruto brief flashes of foresight, like we saw in his fight with Urashiki. And honestly, I think even that dimension where Boruto talked with Momoshiki in the anime after sealing him away, that's a manifestation of the Jougan too. That massive Rasengan he used to destroy Momoshiki? With one motion of his hand, he sealed it inside the Jougan's dimension, rather than simply making it invisible, and then pulled it back out to finish off his opponent. Now, let's talk about the Kokugan. Sukuna Hikona compresses any non-living matter down to a microscopic size. Daikokuten locks that matter away in a dimension where time is completely frozen. So one eye controls time and spirit. The other controls space and matter. One dimension swallows objects and living beings, while the other swallows spirits and chakra-based techniques. Together they cover literally the entire spectrum of control that, according to the lore, once belonged to an Otsutsuki deity named Shibai. And by the way, hit that subscribe button. The more support this channel gets, the more new and interesting videos I'll be able to put out, so you'll always have something to watch on your lunch break. And if you want the simplest way to put it, the Jougan is yin spirit and creation. The Kokugan is yang matter and form. The Naruto universe has always loved this kind of parallel, but this is the first time it's been laid out this literally across two dojutsu. But here's where it gets even stranger. Chapter 75 showed us that Shibai, while he was alive, could control wind, water, and lightning without a single hand seal, conjuring entire storms just by willing them into existence. And in that same scene, you can clearly see that one of his eyes resembles a Byakugan, while the other looks like an unactivated Kokugan with a small triangle marking. And what are Boruto's natural affinities if you think about it? The exact same elements Shibai had. And which eye is it that Dojutsu evolution has always come from? The Byakugan, and we've already seen this play out in the anime too. I'm convinced Shibai awakened the Jougan directly from his Byakugan because in chapter 55, Ishiki described him differently, and the eye we saw was clearly the Jougan, a white eye with a black sclera. At this point, there are just too many coincidences to keep calling them coincidences. So here's where that leaves us. Shibai's power reached our two heroes through two completely different paths. Kawaki got his half synthetically through DNA that Amado extracted from the god's remains, and through Ishiki's karma. Boruto got his half naturally as a descendant of Naruto, who carries the genes of 6 different Otsutsuki. And this isn't the first time Kishimoto's pulled this exact trick, remember Itachi and Sasuke. And speaking of which, let me bring in a bit of Japanese mythology here, because this connects directly to the myth of the god Izanagi. When he returns from the underworld and washes his face, Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon and spirit, is born from his right eye. Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun and matter, is born from his left. Right eye, spirit, left eye, matter. That's the exact same setup we see with Boruto and Kawaki. And this isn't a one-time reference either, remember. The Uchiha techniques Izanagi and Izanami are literally named after this same pair of gods. Kishimoto's basically been signing his name to this idea since the Danzo arc. And that's exactly why, for me, this has stopped feeling like just a pretty parallel and started feeling like a direct hint at where Kishimoto and Ikimoto are taking this story next. If the Jougan and the Kokugan were really just two separate, unrelated powers, they wouldn't line up this perfectly, not in where they sit, not in what they do, not in how neatly they fit into that Yin and Yang framework. But the moment you stop looking at Boruto and Kawaki as two random people who happen to get powers, and start looking at them as two fragments of one original source, everything suddenly clicks into place way too well. One handles perception, spirit, and seeing the truth of things. The other handles suppression, form, and control over matter. And once you see it that way, their rivalry stops being just a fight to see who wins. It becomes the story of two halves that, by the world's own design, are meant to either destroy each other or become whole again. And that's exactly why their connection through karma matters so much. Karma has never really felt like just a power marker. It's always carried something a lot more personal, almost fated. And don't forget, karma is only a fragment of Shibai and the other Otsutsuki, because karma is Shinjutsu. And if karma really is part of this whole power, then something else becomes really interesting. Maybe it doesn't just preserve a specific Otsutsuki's abilities, maybe it preserves the actual principle behind how this power splits apart, evolves, and gets passed down. That would explain why Boruto and Kawaki ended up with completely different sets of abilities, while their karmas still keep reacting to each other. Maybe they're not just two people carrying two different Otsutsuki, maybe they're two different paths leading back to one single source of power that once belonged to Shibai. And if that's true, karma might not just be an inheritance from the Otsutsuki, it might be the connecting link between these two halves of that power. And here's the important detail. If karma really is a way of preserving and passing down Otsutsuki power, then that means Boruto and Kawaki didn't just inherit abilities from two different gods, they inherited fragments of one single system of power. For Kawaki, that connection runs through Ishiki and the body of Shibai that Amado used. For Boruto, it runs through Momoshiki and his own bloodline. In other words, they're both approaching the exact same point, just from opposite directions. And if my theory holds up, karma might not just be the reason they're similar, it might be the very mechanism that eventually brings these two halves back together. So when Boruto's and Kawaki's karma marks start resonating with each other, that's not some random side effect. It looks a lot more like the system reacting to two missing pieces finally meeting. Almost like the history of this whole lineage has been building toward the moment where these two powers simply can't exist apart from each other anymore. And the real question won't be who's stronger, but what it'll cost when these two finally come together, or finally break apart for good. And here's the part that really keeps me up at night. Their karma seals are already reacting to each other. The moment Boruto and Kawaki get close, their karmas start resonating on their own and amplifying each other without either of them doing a thing, almost like two halves of the same power are physically pulling to become whole again. And there's one more question I can't shake. If the Jougan and the Kokugan really are two halves of the same god, what happens when they finally come back together? And honestly, the part I'm even more curious about, how exactly is that going to happen? Because if these really are two halves of Shibai's original power, then bringing them together might not create something new, it could restore what was there from the beginning. And that means Boruto and Kawaki's final battle may not be about who wins, but whether Shibai's complete power is ever allowed to return. Drop your take in the comments and don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoyed this video.